All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. Andy Seymour here. I'd like to run through today's tips and tricks on Microsoft Dynamics GP 2015. Apologies for the delay in getting this webinar started and the problems that we had last time, but hopefully we can run through those now and they should be fine. So what we're going to do is just going to run through some of the key features that have been shown and highlight some of the bits and pieces within GP 2015. So what I want to do is just run through some of the main features, just a small PowerPoint to begin with, and then we'll move on to running some of the examples and show those and how they can work for your system and for those upgrading to GP 2015. So just to run through in the PowerPoint, just going to highlight some of the features that they've added within the copy user settings, and that's around the area with the home page and the area page settings, and show how that can work. Going to run through the supplier purchase order outstanding warnings for those situations where if you're using both Dynamics GP, POP and standard payables, it can avoid any duplications or the wrong type of transaction being entered. And also the new feature with emailing historical documents. So that's where you've used the emailing features within Dynamics GP. You sent the emails out and sent your, for example, things like invoices or orders, and then you realise the wrong email address has been used and you need to resend those documents. That feature's been added there now in 2015. Some of the new workflow functionality. So there's a whole new workflow being redesigned within the last part of GP 2013 R2, and now in GP 2015. So the workflow version 2 has taken over, and there's no need for a reliance on SharePoint and Business Portal. It's all handled within Dynamics GP. Just run through, won't be able to show this, but the updated Business Analyser App and some of the details around that, and some of the new navigation and integration around Management Reporter. Management Reporter is obviously the financial report writer that's used now with Dynamics GP 2013 onwards, and 2015 has introduced some additional integration features with GP. And also just run through some of the scenarios around Refreshable Excel reports and Smartlist Builder. Sorry, Smartlist Designer, not Smartlist Builder. Okay, so let's kick off and have a look at the copy user settings. So before we've been able to copy user details, but it wasn't then able to copy the area page and some of the contents that you then have on your home screens. So what we're able to do now is to mark things like the home page role, home page content and area pages. And so when creating a new user, we can highlight which user we want to copy and which of those features we want to copy across to the new user as we're creating them. And a little bit later on we can just run through a quick example of how easy that is to set up. Excuse me. I also want to run through the supplier purchase order outstanding warnings. So when you're in payables transaction entry and you're using the system where it's got payables and also purchase order processing, so what we've added is, or what Dynamics GP have added is a new feature where if you put in a purchase order number on a payables transaction and that's been used already within purchase order processing, then that will highlight that there's a problem and that you could be duplicating transactions for that supplier. So that feature then obviously just checks and just confirms whether that is the case or not, or whether indeed you need to enter the transaction or the transaction's already been entered through purchase order processing. And hopefully we'll just run through a simple example of that one. The emailing historic documents. So as we explained earlier on, you may have through sales transaction entry or any of the other emailing features within payables, receivables and SOP and POP, you may have sent emails out, and indeed they may as well have gone to an incorrect or wrong email address or need to be resent. So what this allows us to do is, because the transaction is then posted, you can't just go off and add that in and then run that routine again. So a new feature has been added where we can actually just go off, select the document from history, add the email address that we want, mark that one for sending, and then we'll send that one off. Again, nice, simple, straightforward example we can run through so you can see how easy that is to do that now and where you access that information from. Okay, probably one of the biggies within GP 2015, one of the key features is this introduction of workflow version 2. So in GP 2013 R2, that introduced 4 new workflows. So that was the beginnings of removing the dependency on SharePoint and in fact the business portal that was installed on SharePoint. So that quite often needed extra servers, an extra complication and IT and overhead. So now within GP 2015 and in fact 2013 onwards, they've added new workflows and using the workflow system, and that's all held within Dynamics GP. So now on GP 2015, as well as the continuing with the existing workflows that were introduced, we've now got some additional workflows. So hopefully we can show that now, as there are in total about 9 workflows. Admittedly, some of that relates to payroll, which isn't relevant within the UK market, but around purchasing, that's got some significant areas of improvement that'll be useful, and we can run through an example of one of those. One thing to note from GP 2015, the SharePoint workflow system, so the version 1 of Workflow and Business Portal, will no longer be available. So that will be retired, and there's no need to use that going forward. We can do that within the new workflow, which is all contained within Dynamics GP, so it's much easier going forward anyway, to be fair. There was additional licensing within SharePoint Business Portal previously, and luckily the new workflow means that there is no specific licensing around that. So the access to the workflow capabilities is just based on user and window level security within GP. So just as the normal Dynamics GP security works, as long as you've got access to that window, then you should be able to go in and set up the workflow. The only area that may involve some kind of technical installation or involvement is around web services. So one of the workflow pieces allows you to send an email out with a link, and then people can click on a link so that they can then authorize things through an email. Admittedly, that does rely on Dynamics GP web services being installed. Today I'm not able to give an example of that just because I haven't got web services installed, but we can run through a basic workflow and how simple that is to set up now compared to previously. Okay, so we'll talk about the Business Analyser app. The Business Analyser, the app itself, was part of the home page and part of Dynamics GP as well as a separate installation. But it was mainly around the installation of a Dynamics GP client. So now what's happened is we can actually access all of the information, or some of the information that's set up within Business Analyser through additional tablets. So you can go to an app store now, either with an Apple device, as long as it's iOS 7.1 or onwards, and indeed Windows 8.1 tablet, or indeed PC is still available, and indeed Windows Phone version 8 onwards. So using those devices, you can actually install the Business Analyser app, and then from your app you can then access Dynamics GP and the information, so you can create views and reports on information within Dynamics GP without actually logging into GP. So that's something that is going to be getting bigger and bigger going forward, and something that Microsoft are very keen to progress. If we talk about Management Reporter, so Management Reporter is obviously the financial report writer that's replaced FRX, and that was from Dynamics GP, well, 2010 onwards, but certainly from 2013 onwards we're using Management Reporter, and indeed is now Microsoft's key financial report writing system across other products as well. So the integration with Dynamics GP has got tighter, and there's an extra couple of features now that you'll see within the company setup options. So now we've got this Management Report integration to enable general ledger reporting, and indeed if you use analytical accounting, which is the subledger analysis within Dynamics GP General Ledger, then you can also turn that functionality on from within Dynamics GP. So the idea is that from within GP you can control access. So if you're actually creating new companies within Dynamics GP, and instead of having to run the Management Reporter configuration console, we can then just go forward and mark those companies and having access to them from GP. Still staying on the Management Reporter theme, we're probably familiar with a lot of the reports and certainly the navigation lists that were available in earlier versions, probably from 2010 onwards. So what's happened now is there are some new navigation lists. So where you actually create reports within Management Reporter, you can then expose those through the navigation list to be able to see them and then actually launch those reports. And as long as you've got the Management Reporter viewer available or the web client, you should be able to then view the reports that have been generated previously. So it is the fact that the reports have been generated rather than actually being able to generate them, but it allows you to access them, again, tighter integration with Dynamics GP. Okay, within 2013, this idea of the Smart List Designer, so some people previously may be familiar with a thing called Smart List Builder, but Smart List Designer is actually available as standard from the actual application GP 2013 onwards. And what this allows us to do now is to create your own smart lists, and indeed you can create them on SQL views. Now with 2015 onwards we can actually add some new functionality to do with the Excel reports. So previously you could have SQL Server Reporting Services reports and a number of Excel reports that could be installed as part of the reporting tools wizard. What this enables us to do now is to create a smart list using the Smart List Designer, and then there's a new feature that allows you to publish that particular Smart List Designer view, and then that view can then be published so that from outside Dynamics GP you can pick up that Excel report and then refresh the data within it directly from Excel, so that the refreshed data is pulled in and visible directly within Excel. So again, avoids the need to actually log into Dynamics GP to use the smart lists. So tighter integration with Excel and other Microsoft products. Okay, so we've run through the PowerPoints, we've done all that sort of background information, so we'll now try and give you an example. So hopefully if I change my screen, I'll just make sure that you can view that information. So make sure my screen's changed, which it has. So admittedly I'll come out of Outlook, I'll go to Dynamics GP 2015. So we talked initially about copying the user settings. So as we're familiar, I've actually logged in as the SQL Administrator SA user. So if I go to the usual location, Tools, Setup System, User, just open that window. So we'll be familiar with the user setup screen. So what this allows us to do now, you'll see in the toolbar or the ribbon bar along the top, you've got a copy settings feature. So if I just start creating a new user, imaginatively it's called Test, and we're going to put a password for test because that's a required feature. So let's call it Test. I won't bother with the SQL options. But now you can see on the ribbon bar at the top, so we're creating our SQL user and we've got this copy settings feature. So by clicking on copy settings, we're asked if we want to save the user. So I'll go ahead and save the user called Test. And now we've got the original part of the window at the top to do with the security access. So that's where we're going to copy the security settings, so the roles, tasks, company access, all those sorts of things which was available previously. So indeed in this example I'm going to choose a user called Colin. And at the bottom of the window now you'll see that this has been extended. So we've got this home page and area pages. So we can select which settings we want to copy and then select the user. So indeed if I say I want the home page role, home page content and area pages, and obviously as a checkbox we can mix and match those. And then again choose the user. So let's say we want Colin's homepage roles. So just by marking those options, and you can see at the bottom we're copying to the user called Test. And if we say OK, just warning us that we might want to overwrite the content, so we'll continue, and now those settings will be set. So when I click on the user, we can see there's a user called test, and if I logged in as that user, they'd have the same homepage settings and security settings as the Colin user. So it just means that when you're creating new users, you can speed up that process and make it much more straightforward and simple. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that user for a second. Now, we also talked about this, excuse me, the warning of vendors that have got purchase orders. So what we'll do there is, I'll just give you an example. If we go into Tools, Setup, and then in Purchasing, and if we go into Payables, what you'll see towards the bottom of the right-hand side above the buttons, we've got this new option which is Warn if vendor has existing purchase order, and there's a tick box. So this is configurable by each company. So in this example, I've got this company with that option turned on. And if we do Inquiry Purchasing, Purchase Order Documents, and what I'll do is I'll just use all items, and we'll go and choose a PO, which is PO 0909. We display that. So as we can see, we've already got a purchase order entered into the system, and that's via purchase order processing. So now if I come along and I go into Payables transaction entry, so I'm not going via the purchase order processing system, if I go into Payables transaction entry, enter some details, enter a batch, create the batch as usual, and then if we use the same supplier that I entered that purchase order for, so if we use advanced, enter my number, and then we're just going to wait at the PO number field. So as you saw earlier, if I do PO 0909, enter the rest of the purchases amounts, all the rest of the details, we can see my distributions, so they're all present and correct. So now when I press save, and I get the warning message, so because of that tick box, it's now explaining that the vendor has an existing purchase order, choose to continue, to post or save, and choose the go to close the window and view the purchasing navigation list, so we can go to that. So that just warns me I've got options using the go to, or I can continue or cancel. So in this situation I'm going to cancel and delete my transaction, because I need to make sure I got all of my purchase order processing transactions, any shipment invoices or invoices entered via the purchase order processing system rather than through Payables, so that we don't duplicate any transactions. So hopefully that's nice and straightforward. So that leads us on now to the editing email historical documents. So if we have a little look in Inquiry Sales, and we go to Sales Documents, and if we look at historical documents, and in particular, if I go and have a look at Order ST2232 and redisplay, so we can see we've got a historical transaction where we've posted, and what we're finding is that if we drill down on the document number and we have a look at the email details, so within the Zoom Sales Transaction Inquiry Zoom, we've got the debtor ID, and then next to that we've got this little email detail inquiry button. So if we click on there, we can see that the email was sent to Noel Bidsol at Hotmail. So we're finding that that email address is no good. So what we need to do is we need to then resend that email. So what we can do in the ribbon bar at the top here, we've got this edit email. So by clicking on there, we can see a list of email addresses that's been used previously. So I'm just going to unmark all of those. In the drop-down list, I'm going to add a new one. And imaginatively, I'm going to send the email to myself. And I'm going to tick that to make sure that that's the one that's going to be resent. and then literally at the top of the window I just need to click the email, and then you'll see the window, the progress window starts up. Now if I just quickly swap to Outlook, which is minimized, and look in my outbox, we can see that today there's an email in the outbox. So if I double click on there, I can now see that we've got an email to AC1 Nolan Business Solutions, subject Fabricam order ST2232.pdf, and in fact attached is order ST2232 PDF, and this document was created using the Word templates, so I can see it's a historical order, so now that order can be sent to the appropriate person after the last time that it failed. Let me just delete those emails, go back to my inbox, and go back to Dynamics GP. So again, nice and straightforward, just something that is something that's cropped up, and a lot of the features and functionality that's been added within GP 2015 and indeed from GP 2013 onwards has all been gathered from the Kinect. So there's the Microsoft Kinect website where you can register enhancements. So Microsoft do use that, so I'd recommend anyone, if they've got any ideas about future enhancements and features they want to see, and indeed I would recommend that you go off and register and enter your suggestions, or indeed have a look if any of your suggestions are there already, and then vote for them. And the more that they vote for, the more likely it is to get put into future products. Okay, so we're talking about the vendor workflow functionality a little bit earlier on. So the example I've got now is around vendor approval. So what I'm going to do is just go through the if I go into Tools Setup, and under Company we've now got Workflow, and we've got some features here around workflow maintenance, the calendar and the email messages setup. What I'll do is just quickly pick the email messages setup and click on the lookup, and you'll see that there's a whole number of standard email messages that have been created for workflow usage. So if I have a look down the list, I thought there was a PM approval, sorry, vendor approval, that's the one. So if I have a look at the message ID, you can see there's assignment notification for vendor approval workflows, and you can highlight which message type that is, which type of approval, so it's vendor approval. In the subject we can see we can put in some text and also combine some kind of runtime parameters. So here we've got the vendor ID with the percentage, and then in the body of the report we can see we've got again text and combining some of the fields that are available. So in the bottom of that window you can see you've got this select and insert fields, so you can use document fields or workflow fields, and this indeed allows you to choose certain fields of information that you can then select and add into the actual email message, and then at runtime it passes that as a parameter and appears as part of the email. So once you've set up your various email messages, and if we go back to Tools, Setup, Company, Workflow, and look at Workflow Maintenance. So if I go down to Vendor Approval, we can see we've got under Purchasing, we've got Payables Batch Approval, Purchase Order Approval, Requisition Approval, and Vendor Approval. On the drop-down list you can see we've got other things, so under Financials, you've got the General Ledger Batch Approval, Receivables or Sales, you've got Receivables Batch Approval. So you can see these are the additional 5 workflows added to the existing ones that were introduced in GP 2013 R2. So if I go back to Purchasing, choose Vendor Approval, and we've got something very imaginatively called excuse me, Approved Supplier. So the workflow name Approved Supplier, I've marked it as active, given it a description, and we can see the steps that are included in there. And so within the steps we can see we've got step name, Approved Supplier with a description, and the step type is approval. Now there are other types, so you can mark a task, but in this case we're just going to go for straightforward approval. And then at the bottom we can see in the assignment we've assigned it to Colin Smith. Now Colin Smith is a user we saw earlier on when we were creating new users, and the test user was a copy of Colin's security details. And also we've got the option ticked to send a message, and that's the vendor workflow approval, and that's the email message that we looked at just a couple of minutes ago. So what we've done is set up a workflow so that when we add a supplier, it means that we can go ahead and make sure that there's a notification email or notification within Dynamics GP sent to the user called Colin, and it's only then when Colin approves it can we actually make sure that supplier is available for usage. So let's just run through that. I'm logged in as the SA user, so cards, purchasing, creditor. So let's create a new supplier, again imaginatively called test. Test supplier, put them in a class, let's make them Australian, and we'd obviously enter all the rest of the details, but what you can see now is towards just underneath the ribbon bar there's an approved supplier not submitted. So what that allows me to do is to actually save the test supplier, and so once we've entered and saved it, we can see that that supplier is waiting for approval, and in the ribbon bar we've now got a submit button, and there's a section called workflow. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to submit that, and what that means is within the setup we saw that that goes to Colin Smith for approval. So we've created the test supplier. We've now got the additional workflow action to add some comments. So let's enter, please Colin, can you approve this supplier? So we'll submit that. Just let that go through. And then what we'll do is once that's submitted, we can then recall that supplier called test, and you can see now that the status has changed. So in the top of the window we've got this option now that says approved supplier pending approval by Colin Smith with a due date, and indeed the ribbon bar we can see that there's a view history. We can see where it's happened, so the workflow originated, and then there's a task now pending for Colin Smith. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly log in as Colin. So Colin logs into Dynamics GP. So let's log in as Colin. Just let that load. Just my warning about using Fabricam. Okay, once that builds, what we can do now is we can go and have a look at the Colin's tasks and indeed his workflow tasks. So let me just refresh that. Build the windows, and if we go to cards, purchasing, creditor, and we pull up the test, so it's approving. So what I want that to do now is just to refresh. It just takes a minute to run through, but what we should be able to do within the workflow tasks, just make sure those are all turned on. Yeah, we've got the workflow notifications. So what we're hoping is there'll be a workflow notification, and then Colin can then approve the supplier. Just leave that for a second. The other thing that to be aware of is within the navigation list. So if we look into purchasing, just while that's happening, we can see that there's some new options that have been added. So if we look under creditors, we can see here there's vendors not submitted and vendors pending approval navigation list. So that just takes a minute to run as well. So if we just let that build, what that would then do is show the lists, navigation list with all of the suppliers in there. And that is proving to be a little bit slow. Let's just have a look. Okay, starting to come up now. So within the navigation list, let's just let that finish, be a little bit patient. Fortunately, I'm running a number of products on my laptop, so it's struggling a little bit. So we can see here the creditor name, test supplier, creditor ID test, and it's pending a user action. So there's also the navigation with the workflow user, which is demo Colin. Actually, I've just realised I shouldn't be logged out of Dynamics GP, but the integration is actually down to Active Directory level. So what we'll do, we'll just exit Dynamics GP and log in as the other user. So let's just quickly do that. And let me just set my Control-Delete, log in as Colin. Okay, it would help if I put my password in. So the workflow integration isn't just with the Dynamics user, so this is through to Active Directory. So what I've actually needed to do is to log into the network as Colin and using Windows Active Directory, and then if I just log in as Colin to GP now. We should now start to see the workflow. Now we've seen that in the navigation list, and by logging in as Colin, he's the only one who can approve. And you'll see now in this situation the workflow task, we've got the vendor approval. And we can do it in a couple of ways. We can either go into through cards, purchasing, creditor, and approve that way, or in our workflow task you'll see there's a link. So that takes into creditor maintenance. So approve supplier pending. So then what we can do within the workflow, we can choose approve, reject, or delegate. We'll choose approve, but the reject, what that allows us to do is obviously send the rejection through, and then the other users will see that that's not appropriate, or indeed we can actually set up delegate users. So for example, if Colin was on holiday or away out of the office on business or something like that, we can have a delegate user and then assign that to the delegate user to approve it. So let's just go ahead and approve that. So Colin's now going to say, yes, I have approved. And then unfortunately, we're just going to need to log off as Colin. Go back on as the known and demo user. And then what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to log in, and we'll log in as SA, and we'll be able to view the history. Okay, that's just rebuilding. So let's go back into cards, purchasing, creditor. So log back in not only as the SA user but the administrator within the system, and choose a supplier. And we can see now at the top it's an approved supplier, got the completed date and time. And actually if we view workflow history, we can then see all the details we saw before, where it's originated, and then we've got the comments, please Colin, can we approve the supplier? And then when Colin logged in, yes, he was approved, so we can view all the history that relates to the workflow for approving that particular supplier. Okay, so apologies, that took a little bit longer than I was expecting. So what I'm going to do now is just revert back to see if there's any questions. So let's go and have a look. If anyone's posted any questions, I can try and answer those. Okay. Okay, well that must have been hopefully slow enough for everyone to understand, because I'm pleased to say there aren't any further questions, so that's good news. So what we'll do is we'll conclude the webinar at this time, and if we go through, if you've got any questions, please do email me on acmore@nolanbusinesssolutions.com, or indeed you can try lvosser@nolanbusinesssolutions.com, and hopefully we can come back to you. So thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another webinar. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for attending.